We are all set to get started here today. I want to welcome you guys to our afternoon um, webinar on the LearnOn webinar series. This one is the leadership piece, and we're going to be talking about moving to online instruction. So last week we sort of did an unveil of the website. We did somewhat quick tour of the website and gave you the pieces that you could look at. Today, we're going to dive in a little deeper especially into the district leader section and talk about some of the pieces that you should be considering as you make your decisions to move on to instruction. Nicole Bond is here with me as well to support things. Um, and in addition, our hope is that Jared will be able to stop by and talk with us, although he got called into a meeting, as I'm sure lots of you are getting the same types of things happening. We are recording this session. We also recorded the session earlier this morning, so you're able to go back and view any of those parts that you might like. And we'll be making the slide deck available as well following this series. So I just want to let you know that we have this great team that has been working with us to produce the content on the LearnOn site. And so this content has been gathered from tons of resources across the state and across the country. And you just get a little sense of who is responsible for the work that is going on, that has already gone on and will be going on through the next 2 weeks and beyond as we continue to try and support you. I just actually left a statewide meeting where they distributed guidance to the IUs to help us support schools. And you should be receiving some of that guidance from PDE either later today or first thing tomorrow. Now, as we get started here, you're going to notice this is a little bit different. We're using our large Zoom room, and we're testing this out for next week when we'll be using this with educators. And so normally in Zoom, you can just simply unmute your microphone and you can participate that way. But trying to manage something for hundreds or potentially even thousands of participants, we're using this type of room. So one thing that I can tell you is that you can submit questions to the Q&A pod just by clicking and submitting those questions. Nicole and I will be answering those as we go along the way. And in addition, you can raise your hand. So we can create a situation where we can unmute your mics, but coming in, your mics are turned off, and as are your video cameras. And but if you do want to engage in any of that, you can. The chat that is there is probably disabled for you, but we can send messages there. So for example, I'll ask Nicole to send out the LearnOn site into the chat so that you guys can take a look at that. So this is part of what we'll be using to facilitate the webinars again next week. Your questions will come directly to us. We can either respond directly to you, or we can push that out to everybody. Just so you can be aware, and then raise your hand if you'd like to use the microphone. And you can see at the bottom of the screen, we have the screenshot of what you're probably viewing. So the last thing is that we've set up an Act 48 credit link that will be used with your staff as we go through this. You're more than welcome to use that following this webinar if you'd like to receive Act 48 credit. It'll also help us to test that system, make sure that all of that's working, so we'd appreciate that. So just a couple of things about the resources that we provided for you. We are providing the Act 48 credit for anybody who attends either the live webinar or attends an archived webinar. So when they finish those webinars, if they want to get credit, they're going to need to complete the form. It does mean that they have to stick around to the end. There will be a redirect link at the very end of the webinar. When we quit this webinar, it'll push that out and it'll send you to the correct form to submit that. And then we'll be able to collate all of that information. In addition, if you're looking for attendance information, like who's attending the webinars, we would use that as the place to record who is actually coming in there. All of these will be archived on our YouTube channel. It's linked right on the front page of the LearnOn site so that you can make use of it. And in addition, we've created a short URL there, the bit.ly that you see there, LIU LearnOn recordings. And we've already posted a couple of things in there, and there'll be more information coming in the future days. So our resource site, of course, is learnon.liu12.org. Hopefully that's what you're here for. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can make use of that, both for yourself and for educators. But one thing that we really want to emphasize for you is that we're going to be trying to talk to educators about how to change their expectations when they move to online instruction. And continuity of education is going to be one of those critical pieces that play a huge role in this change. So continuity of education really is about taking what you've already been doing in the face-to-face environment and moving it into some type of online or virtual space. And I will tell you that immediately following this, I have another call where we're going to be talking statewide again about innovations that are taking place. And we're going to need this in this unprecedented time in education. The innovation is really going to be important. So Butler Area School District today, I believe, began instruction through radio. There are several districts that are looking at using TV as expectations for how they may be delivering instruction, and just phone. I was just on a call where they said, you can deliver all of your instruction in one way, and then if you need to, there might be a student where you're going to have to call and give them the instructions. And a lot of that's associated with the idea of FAPE, which is the free, appropriate public education piece. And the idea is that if you're educating one, you need to educate everybody. Now, we did get guidance from the US Department of Education, which indicated that school districts are obligated to do their best to try and provide these services to everybody, but that they didn't want for you to feel like if you can't educate every person that you should educate no one. So as you move forward with this, it's really going to be important to make sure that you think about how you're going to provide educational services to the entire general population that you have. But also, I just want you to think about the fact that when we say, make sure that all students have equal access, typically we go to the part where we say students with disabilities. But in this particular case, you should be thinking about students who don't have a device, who don't have online access, who don't have an appropriate caregiver that can actually provide the education. So when you think about, a first grader, you can't expect that you can send an email out to a first grader and have them follow all the steps, complete their work for a full day of learning, and then submit their work at the end of the day. They're obviously going to have somebody who is supporting them. And in some cases, that could be mom or dad who is also at the same time trying to work from home remotely. And so we know that when we talk about ensuring equal access and equity, it really isn't just about disabilities, but there's a wide breadth of information that's needed there. Now, each of our webinars is also going to begin with just a little bit of pedagogical foundation and a little bit on the expectations. And so, we talk about things like less is more and prioritizing and balancing your work and thinking about how are we going to continue to get students to the finish line for this school year. And in just listening to Deputy Secretary Matt Stem talk about it, what he was really saying is that a lot of this is going to depend upon where the students are and how you're going to be able to work with them. And so you shouldn't necessarily be thinking about, well, we've got to reach all of these standards. You should be thinking about how do we provide this education in the next step. But we also know that there's an importance in the social emotional learning component. And when we think about online instruction, there is a comforting factor for students to see their teacher's face. And so wherever possible, we're encouraging educators to actually engage in that. And one of the norms that we've set up for our staff is just a greeting. So we use an online tool called Slack to do our messaging to one another. And It's become a practice beginning really at the beginning of last week to get up and as you get to work, say good morning, which is something that you would normally do, but in an online environment, it's not as easy. And then being clear with your objectives, your expectations, the time it's going to take to complete tasks, and also organizing and sequencing the material. These are going to be clear things, and you'll see this as we jump into the website. You'll see this as an example of what we would hope that others would be doing. In addition, there's a link out there you can see to our best practices page, and that's where we want educators to start. So that's the key piece to these webinars. Now, by the end of this session, we'll also have gone through these um, 3 pieces here. And one of the things, if you've ever seen Jared and myself present, you'll notice that that we do lots of things that don't have text on the screen, lots of images or videos to help convey our message. But when you're in an online environment like this, sometimes it's better to have the text on there so that people can read because of the interpretive nature of the types of sessions that we do. And we want to try to be clear in terms of what we're doing. So our hope is that you'll be able to, for yourself, identify where you're going to need the most help and then how you can do things. And so in keeping with that, the um, the design plans that we recognize, and as you look through, we recognize that each district is in a different place, that it's going to be important for you to figure out what are your resources, what are your strengths, and what are the areas that are going to provide the greatest challenges to you as you deploy online or blended learning through there. And we've seen districts who have been doing this already for years that don't feel like they're in the right place to maneuver all of their students online. And we also know that that districts are considering these different elements. And if you want to transition, that that it's going to be a very compressed timeline. And so if you were to sit there and plan out for a whole year, you would probably not do what is going to happen over these next few days and weeks. And so while we face the reality that that this type of learning is going to continue, you're going to have to also reconcile with yourself that some of this is going to be a little bit different in terms of how you might ordinarily implement things. And as I was talking about the innovativeness that we're looking for, I think that's also going to be important. Now, I added this slide from this morning to now so that these are the definitions, and we will get these posted up on the website. But when we started out with PDE this morning, they talked about 3 pieces that have these definitions that are critical. One is about continuity of education. We sort of talked about this, but the idea is how are you going to conduct your planned instruction over time? And planned instruction is that formal teaching and learning process that normally occurs in the classroom. So the planned instruction that takes place is going to look very different than what it did before you left the face-to-face environment. And you'll notice it says, in order to receive grade and credit, students must regularly attend and complete course requirements. So we did ask the question, in fact, this was my question, was how are our schools supposed to be taking attendance? And what the deputy secretary said is that taking attendance isn't so much about making sure that a student has logged in, but that instead they have the ability to log in. And I think that's a clear and interesting distinction for how we need to look at students completing their work. So for this piece, students, you want to be able to access the information of how are your students and how many of them are able to get the materials that you're providing to them. And if they are able to get access to them, then that is what is going to be more important than your attendance. And then finally, enrichment review, which is the informal activities that extend prior learning. And so in this case, you're going to be doing both planned instruction and enrichment, but you shouldn't necessarily be looking at the online instruction as just being enrichment, where you're not covering any of the standards necessarily. So with that, I'm going to highlight our 5 steps, and I'm going to jump out here for a moment to our website. And if you go to the LearnOn website, and here I am on the site itself, and as we showed you, that you have this space for educators that you can take a look at, and we also have a space for district leaders. On the site, um, there is a uh, schedule that can be followed here. And what you'll notice about the schedule is that we have a few things like these Discovery Ed webinars that are being added by content providers of a trusted nature for ourselves. So Discovery Ed are a number of these experiences. We've also added PACT webinars. And then on Friday, Kiker Learning, for those of you that have attended any of our Google events, the Kiker Learning piece is another one of those um, uh, things that's going to be really important for your teachers, because it's a great provider for content. And then, of course, our webinars begin on Monday. So if you're looking for opportunities for how people can get learning, we will continue to add those on here, and then you can take a look and see. So for Discovery Ed, there is a separate registration process, and we will identify in the calendar all the LIU12 webinars and at the front, and there is going to be a registration. This is probably our biggest question that we're getting so far. You'll notice it says coming soon. We expect to have this up by Wednesday. And the idea is just to give us an opportunity to see about how many people are going to be there, because it's very different having 40 or 50 as we do now in comparison to hundreds or even 1,000 people that might attend. And we're prepared for that, but we'd like to get a sense of it. So again, you can see that will be coming soon. And then here is the YouTube channel where you can go and find the archives of everything. And then we will have a form here for the Act 48 hours. So if your staff is asking, how do we get those Act 48 hours? That's where they'll be posting it. In addition, we're going to, because this site is evolving a great deal over time, we are going to put recently or added content. So as we do updates, you're going to see things like this added in here. So we have added some webinars. We're going to date or timestamp them as needed, because we're about to release information. Our tax staff have been working vigorously to produce content for the site in each of the PDE initiatives. So if you're looking for things on autism or MTSS and how to move those types of resources to online, you'll see that added. And as soon as it gets released, it'll be added here. So for you as a district leader, if you're looking for things or you want to know what's new, you can check it out there. And then, of course, we have our FAQs that you can use as well. So if I jump back for a moment to the website, what you'll see again, or to the slide deck, excuse me, the slide deck has these transitions, and then they have placeholders here as well. And I want you to treat that as if they are placeholders, and you'll see that most of what we're going to do is going to be built off the website. But as we move along, it has elements that you can use. And I want to emphasize, if you're planning on using our website with your staff, you'll be able to get access to the slide deck, and then you'll be able to share out or use some of the slides, so that if you're looking to create things, you can pull them right from the slide deck and make use of them. So if I go over to the district leader page, what you'll see is that we tried to be very deliberate in terms of setting up the steps. And you'll notice, I don't think that on any one page, there's more than 5 steps. So we've tried to chunk things down, but it's important to recognize the best practice of using this chunked out information, of listing out numbers for each step that students should do, almost as if it's a checklist for them to be able to complete things. And so that's part of what we're looking to help you with. And so as we dive in and we start thinking about what are the things that you need to think about and consider for when you're going to do your work, what you'll see is that we've set up some expectations. And these are expectations for the district, the staff, the students, and the families. And we know that each of these separate stakeholders are going to represent a different way that you're going to have to work with people. And so thinking about just starting with family, like considering the supports that are going to needed to be there for your families, and considering that the littles K to 4 are going to be faced with trying to learn with the assistance of others. Those are just things you're going to need to think about. And so these, you'll see a lot of them say consider. And so we just want to give you a chance to start thinking about the different areas that you need to be working through as you go through this process. And then there are 3 steps that need to be taken here as we think about how we operationalize what's happening. And so to begin with, we're going to start with district policy and governance. And you'll see we at RIU have just recently created a sample telework policy for staff. And you need to be thinking about how are you going to, what type of guidance are you going to give to staff in terms of working from their home? So, you want to set them up for success. And so in this case, if I open up the telework guidance, what you'll see is that it talks about establishing a work environment and what your schedule should be, using the technology and supplies that you have in your space, making sure that you're securing all of your files and records and that you're not disclosing private information. So as I'm giving a webinar here, I need to be aware of who else might be in the room when I'm sharing this type of information. And we've talked a little bit about this already, but the idea of doing counseling, Zoom is encrypted end to end. And so that provides an easy way for you to be able to conduct something that's secure online. However, if you don't know who else might be listening around me, and so we have to be aware of that. Like if we're trying to do something that would be sensitive by nature, we have to make sure, again, using headphones so that nobody else can listen in, or being aware of those types of things. And so this is just a way for you to get to think about how to get started and what types of information you might need to convey out to your staff. And we also recognize that school board meetings might be difficult to hold. And so you might not be able to adopt new policies depending on the guidelines. A lot of our policy documents sit for 2 board meetings, and your school year might actually be over by the time you could actually get the policy into place. We've also included information on the FERPA and HIPAA guidelines for Zoom and Google Hangouts, and those that are provided under the G Suite. And it does remind me that you want to be making sure that you check with your tech staffs and looking at any of the tools that you might be selecting for online use to make sure that you are complying with your COPA policies as well. So, and then we talk a little bit about those live streaming policies and what that might be looking like as you try and have staff and students work through it. So the idea here is that you would be thinking about what are the policies that are going to be needed for conducting the work with folks. So so we think that that this is going to be important for you to as a first step, that that everybody has the ability to think about what their policies might be. Now, the second step is in developing a professional learning plan. Now, when we talk about professional learning plan, you have to think about how are you going to conduct this. So, most of your work is probably done face to face. So if you're trying to do synchronous professional learning, we have included some options that you can choose. But in addition, archiving. So just as we're doing these webinars, you can see whether or not you're able to archive those webinars and find a place where educators can go back and take a look at them. And then also thinking about what does it look like when they're done? What are the actionable steps that they can take coming out of the webinar? Because it is easy to get lost in the YouTube nature of I watch this video and then I watch this video and then I watch this video and then you keep going, and then pretty soon, lots of time has gone by, and all of a sudden you're sitting in a situation where you haven't actually gotten any work done. And so you want to make sure that when they're done, that they do have that opportunity um, to be able to join that, and then ensure that your caregivers and parents are prepared for it. So that's the third step in operationalizing, and we've given you a little bit of guidance for this. So if I jump over to that site, we've created a few links that you can think about in terms of how you're going to get materials out to students. There's been a lot of work done, and I know schools are using the grab and go lunches. And so as we think about, like, is there a way for us to provide internet access, whether it's through school buses with hotspots, or extending coverage in our buildings so that people can be in a car in the parking lot. But we also wanted to make sure that that we included this type of information. So Vicki Davis, who goes by Cool Cat Teacher, she provides a little overview on how to learn in an online classroom. And so this might be a good place for you to start in your communication with parents and getting things out to them. And then finally, there's this Common Sense newsletter, which is a great place for you to think about how you can keep kids on a schedule while they're at home. And so while this material is typically in their Plus newsletter, it sets up a way to do a schedule for a parent. So this type of guidance, I think, would be really valuable, where they might have a kid do math for 30 minutes and reading for 30 minutes, and then phys ed, and thinking about those things that happen with throughout the entire day that parents may not necessarily think about. And here's another one: connecting with their friends. So making sure that they get some of that personal time, that what all these things that normally happen within the school, we want to make sure also are able to happen throughout the day. So we've created those pieces to try and help parents through this operationalizing piece. So again, 3 steps for you: thinking about your district policies, thinking about your learning plan, and then preparing your parents for moving to the online piece. So that's the first step. And you can see we've laid out these steps here, these 5 steps for you. And as you go to start preparing, this is where you need to start thinking about how you're going to train your staff. So this is also a good moment for me to just pause and remind you that if you have questions, that you can use the Q&A tab that's on your toolbar to populate questions, and Nicole and I will do our best to get those answers for you. So as I jump back to the online piece, we have adopted the Oreo online learning from Allison Yang. And you can see it talks about objective, responsibility, expectations, and organization. And this framework is what we're using to guide our educators through moving to online. And you have to recognize that you need to do each of those 4 categories for your teachers, for your students, and for your caregivers, because each one of those is going to need to be able to think about where they're going to do their work and how they're going to get it done. And then, so that first step is just planning for staff training and how you're going to do it. And I'll come back to some of the resources that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But then the second step is to establish your digital content warehouse. Now, for some schools, you already have a learning management system, and that's great. And if all of your teachers are in there, then you're ready to use that as your warehouse. But in some cases, you won't have all of your educators in there. And the process for getting them in can be daunting. Like a LMS is a big structure. In addition, like something like Google Classroom. So I saw some posts like, and we've seen some providers that are saying Google Classroom is a great way to go, and you can just simply put all your kids in there. But doing that face-to-face is hard enough. So you want to think about, how are we going to create a place for teachers to work? And it might just be a Google Doc or a HyperDoc for them to use. But from a school district perspective, it's really, you can think about creating a directory that lists all of your teachers, so that a parent who has a third, fifth, and eighth grader can go to one stop and find where those resources are for each teacher. But as district leaders, another thing you need to consider is that more than likely, given the numbers, you're going to have staff who are going to get significantly ill. And how are you going to work with that? In the school district, you have lesson plans and somebody comes in and fills those lessons. So one of the recommendations that we have for district leaders is that you think about having your staff collaborate. So in elementary, it's probably a little bit easier in that you can have one third grade page. Now you still would list each of the teachers there and they would link out to the same location. But by having your third grade staff work together, it does a couple of things. One is if a staff member falls ill, the content material can still be designed and pushed through. The second thing that it does is it brings a sense of team to your educators. I know that for us, Jared, Nicole, and I have been working together, and you saw the large list of people, and you have to create a situation where everybody can work together, and that actually can lessen the workload for everybody. So while this is a daunting task, having your teams collaborate will allow them to work together a little and lessen the workload. Now, I will mention this. One of the very first things that we did, for those of you that know Jared, he's very particular about the way things look, and so we had to agree between Jared, Nicole, and myself. We're each going to work on things in parallel, and we are going to have to be okay with the work that gets done. So we almost did a pinky swear, virtually, of course, to say, you know what, it's going to be okay if I do something, or if Jared does something, or Nicole does something. We're just going to accept it. We're not going to be critical of it. We're going to allow for those differences to make sure that we work through things. So when you think about establishing the warehouse, I think that's going to be, again, we're back in the preparation steps. So if you're preparing, you've got to figure out where your warehouse is going to be, and then how your teachers are going to get that information to you so you can list it out on that directory. The additional steps then are to consider your special needs students and how you're going to conduct their education. And again, the guidance that we're getting is really telling us that we're going to have to do things a little bit differently, most likely. And so thinking about, we have questions for you to start considering in terms of how you can get some of that work done, and what you might need to do to approach it. As we work with our staff, which are working with all special needs students, these are just questions that you want to get folks together and then have the discussion. So you can see it says review and discuss the considerations. So just talking through problems and seeing what types of solutions you can come up with. And then you begin the process. And again, here, this is where you may have some actionable steps for things to get done. And some of it you may have done. So like surveying families to see their access to Wi-Fi, that may be something you already have information for, and you can sort of check it off. But creating repositories and thinking about condensing down instruction into small bite-sized pieces is going to be important. And then finally, encouraging these sound principles of online instruction. So we listed them out there for you, and you're going to need to check in with your staff often. You'll see that coming back again for us, where you can talk to them about what does it look like for online instruction. And so we've tried to keep some simple steps here for you about emphasizing their time on task and giving prompt feedback as ways to engage educators in that conversation. So as we move along, so we operationalize and consider our policies and prepare by doing some of the planning pieces. Then we're ready to mobilize. And when we go to the mobilization piece, this is where you need to start. And I know many of you have already started this, but you have to establish these clear expectations and communication channels with your staff. And so these are just some examples of ways that you can start talking to them. And you want to schedule regular meetings. And our suggestion would be small group meetings. So It might be by department, for example. You might you might be able to say, you know, for the high school where you are departmentalized, or the middle school perhaps, you know, or you're in teams, we're going to meet, and it might be, these meetings might be 10 minutes long. It might just be that much. But again, how can we make sure that we're on the same page? And by holding short meetings throughout the day, you can get to all staff. And you're going to have to leverage additional staff members, whether it's principals and assistant principals, department leads, or lead teachers, to help you with this communication piece, because you want to make sure that you're setting up the expectations of what you want, but also communicating. And you know, we're often saying in our division, communicate often and communicate clearly. And so both of those, I think, are really important. And then scheduling office hours, or giving some type of opportunity for those to ask questions. And you do need to think about how you're going to do it. So a Google form is a great way for your staff to also submit questions, so that you have them, and then you can actually provide answers. And you can do it either in a written format, or you can address it in these short meetings that you're going to have. You're also going to need to think about, like, how are your parents going to ask questions? Because typically what happens prior to the shutdown is that parents could call into the school. You might even have a way that that they can call directly in, or they can leave messages for teachers, and then teachers can call back from a school phone line. Well, that's not happening now. And so, you know, what are your options to allow parents to be able to get in communication with how to get your educators to get in communication with your parents? And so it might be using *69 on your cell phone, so that it blocks their number when they call out to somebody. And we can encourage them to try that with family members, you know, who are even within their house. So I could have my wife, if she wants to practice using that blocking technology, she can call my cell phone to see how well that works. But also remembering that Zoom is free. And so, you know, if we go under free online tools, you'll see Zoom is one of those tools that we can use. And Zoom, which has lifted the cap of 40 minutes on the free accounts. Also, one of the great things about Zoom is that it has a call-in feature. So an educator can set up a Zoom session and provide the phone number for somebody to call in. And that, in that case, they won't have to worry about using video. They can leave a picture up on the screen, but the person who calls in is really just making a phone call. And then that provides an easy way for parents and teachers to have voice communication without worrying about the security of giving out our own information. So that's the first thing under uh, uh, under the mobilizing section. And then we're going to be providing guidance to our staff, and templates if needed. And so when we think about this mobilization, um, I just want to mention that we created these templates for you. And I mentioned Allison Yang's work, and it's tied to the Oreo method. So if you already have lesson plans, one thing you don't want to do is, you don't necessarily want to have your educators um, trying to do duplicative work. So lesson plans are fine. We created the daily lesson template as something that you might be able to provide to students or use as part of their lesson plans, and it has been adapted to include UDL principles. The weekly overview template is another guiding document, and these are the types of things you want to have educators giving to students, so that they can think about the sequence of events that they have to work, and getting the check off of the types of assignments that they have. And so I think that that's going to also be critical for educators to work through as they think about how they conduct their work. You could take those templates, you could brand them with your school information, you could do lots of different things, but you can see that they're trying to create the norms for online learning and the expectations that they have for the work that they're going to be creating. So we've sort of talked again about how do we get started, just the policies and procedures that you need to put in place, and then what do you need to do to prepare, and then mobilize your group. The next step is converting your work into online instruction. And so First of all, we want to go back to the inclusive practices of making sure that we're addressing all students. So accessibility can be dealt with in each of these special pages, one for special ed, one for gifted, and one for uh, English learners. And I also want to emphasize that one of the things we're planning to add to the website this week will be specific pages to help the rest of your staff. And so as you move away from, okay, now we're mobilizing and we're getting things ready and we've prepared these documents that we're going to use, think about all of your staff and how you might be able to use them. So you have school counselors, you have reading specialists, you may have OT/PT folks, you have school nurse. And so each of those people that sort of do their work, they might be able to pivot how they conduct their work into different ways. And so inclusive practices doesn't necessarily just apply to your students, it also applies to your staff in thinking about how we can include them in some of the work that we're doing. And it could be that you have school counselors meeting with some of your teachers. And that could just be to sort of share out some of the communication pieces and leverage, again, those short meetings that can help improve the morale of your organization. And then to help with the digital conversion, we created this chart. And the idea here is you're going to really have to help your staff as they ask questions about how do I, right? How do I change everything that I've done for 20 years into online, right? They've worked for their entire career in this face-to-face environment. So we've created this guiding document to help you with moving from a face-to-face approach to thinking about the tools that you might want to consider, and then a few tips. Because those daunting lists of 1,000 tools that have gone free, we don't think are particularly helpful, because you're already trying to do something that you're not used to and moving your instruction over. And now you're like, well, go look at the list. Oh, this is a great tool, and I think it might be friendly, so I'm just going to try it out. That's sort of not the approach we want. Think about what it is that you want students to be able to do, and then look for the appropriate tool that'll work for that particular situation. And as an example, I had a chemistry teacher who called me over the weekend and said, how am I ever going to do labs? Well, as I scroll down through all these, you can see labs can actually be done through two different types of simulation environments: PhET, which are free and are always free, and Explore Learning Gizmos, which have gone free during this situation that we have going on. And so is it perfect? No, of course not. But it is a way that you can actually have students conduct lab activities, collect data, conduct analysis, and write up a report using online methods. So there are a lot of ways that you can make the transition from face-to-face to virtual. And this would be another one of those types of things where if you have an educator who says, look, this is what I'm trying to do, and you're stuck, have them submit it to our FAQs. We have a number of people that are monitoring the FAQs, and they can work through that. So as you get to this heavy lift of converting your work, then you're going to get to the place where you're going to have to deploy the learning. And here, this is where we're going to reemphasize those key pieces about consistent expectations and communication. So reinforcing those expectations, communicate early, often, give those expectations out to staff. Don't be afraid to, again, set it up so that you're setting something out. One of the things that you might do is each morning you could set up something where you send out a morning thought. That could be something that becomes, a part of what you're trying to deliver to folks as you go through your day. And they could just be something where you remind people, hey, we understand we're all in the same boat. Here are a couple things to think about. And then those check-ins. You want to encourage the same type of contact between students and teachers that we see that's going to take place between teachers and administrators. So as administrators, you need to encourage a lot of contact with your teachers where you're checking in with them and you're talking to them about what's happening in their situation. And in some cases, so as an example, my admin assistant, she lives in a place where she doesn't have high-speed access, so I need to actually call her on the phone. She can't do Zoom. And so, there is something about hearing that person's voice and talking with them about their issues that are going on and what's happening in their life. And I know, like for me during the day, when I'm in the office, I go out several times a day and I just talk to her. Even though we might use messaging and email and things like that, I go out and talk to her. Well, that piece is sort of missing for her now, and so we're trying to also manage our staff in the same way, and we want to make sure that we have that ability to um, just to be able to work with staff in that same way. And there is something about listening, and hearing the cues that come in their voice or seeing their face when you're doing a Zoom that can help you to provide supports to them. And then you want to continue the professional learning opportunities as best that you can. So throughout the day, again, using that teamed approach can provide opportunities that while instruction is taking place for additional learning to also take place, because we know these days are going to be really busy. I feel like at the end of the day, I've been on Zoom all day long, and it can be exhausting. But so educators can tag team different ways that they work. And so while one person might be providing the online instruction in a synchronous format, another person could be attending a webinar and working through things. So that's another one of those pieces that has the power. And then finally, remembering the social emotional needs of the staff and students. Again, Jared and I talk about this a lot. We are not necessarily warm, fuzzy people, but we recognize the need to um, that you have this cabin fever, this isolationism that is taking place now, where we're telling people to keep their distance, and we need to continue to look after the needs of our staff. So that becomes another important part of what we might need, and thinking about how we do our work. And I'm just going to jump back over to the slide deck for a moment. And so while you see we have some of these um, uh, pieces, I did want to call attention to how do I get my staff what they need, remembering that chart that you have, and then thinking about those resources that are there. So the resources that are in the website are mostly under the educator page. So considering all learners has our special ed, our EL, and our gifted information. And then the free online tools, not only do the free online tools have important information, they give you sort of the setup of what we've talked about, but then there are opportunities for educators to learn. So when we think about that ongoing professional development, if you haven't considered this, Who Knew It is a great tool that we use with our staff to provide training in bite-sized videos. We've worked with Who Knew It to open this up to anybody within our footprint using a generic username and password. So if you say, okay, I want my teachers to learn how to use Zoom. Zoom is one of those tools that's in there. So you would log in with that, type in Zoom to the chat or into the search bar, and then you would be presented with, it's about 2 hours worth of video content, but it's chunked into 2-minute sections or 3-minute sections. And so people can find the information they're really looking for, and they can make use of that. When we think about how to do the content piece, you have online tools, and I should point out that not only do we have the online tools section, but we have a bunch of tools where we've created or compiled, I should say, help and tutorials for them, so you can see. So we have our own Zoom page that has that. But in addition, when you go to one of these sites and you look at one of these tools, such as Actively Learn, we also have highlighted two things. One is the terms of service are listed there. So we really encourage you to work with your educators to consider COPA compliance and what the age of their students is, so that they know whether or not they're allowed to use that tool. And then the second thing that we have is whether or not that tool is free or not. And so we want to provide that information so that you understand, once we go back to school in the fall, or whenever we start back, I should say, will I still be able to use this tool? And so that information is provided right up front. But there's also a distinction between online tools and content tools. So content tools, the online tools are things that help you. So Actively Learn is sort of a reading um, piece that allows you to put pause points into reading and get students to come back to their information. Online content resources are a little bit different. They provide content sources in each of the categories. So you can go under science and you can look at like Discovery Ed as a science content provider. So as you move to online, what are those sources? And you can see these have a wealth of information about what it is that teachers might need to access in order to move their instruction online. So you have the tools and you have the content resources, and they're both different. And then I also wanted to highlight for you some of our additional resources. And I wanted to talk about what are your options for your work. And so you can see that we have, excuse me, we have put in the Edgenuity and Odysseyware offer. And I'm going to go back to the slide deck here for a moment to highlight one of the pieces that you might be considering. So as you work through this, most of what we've been talking about is just in the recent moments is um, providing a do-it-yourself instruction. So the idea here is that you're going to have your teachers create all of the online instruction. If you're not in a situation where you can do that, there are some options that can be highlighted through Edgenuity and Odysseyware. And one of those is to have them provide the content and your teachers would provide the instruction. And there is a fee for that, but you can use that to quickly ramp up the instructional materials that you might need for any of your courses. And you can pick and choose levels or groups that you might need to do that with. In addition, you might be thinking, well, if the simplest lift is to use Odysseyware to provide all of the instruction. So their educators would be providing that instruction. And again, if you go under district leaders and you go to additional resources, that's where you'll find, as you scroll down here, you'll find the information on those types of offers so that you can see the content pieces and what it might cost in order to do those types of options. And if you have questions, you can reach out to our team and specifically Alan Moose for that part of things. So with that, as we come close to the end here, we want you to think about what are some of those next steps. And so as we go through, and we talked about the district piece. So, and I'm going to back up here just a moment here. So you get to that deploying phase, and at whatever point that'll be for you, then you have to think about, besides reviewing and enforcing those expectations, what else do you need to do, right? And we talked about the social emotional needs. So you get to that point where you're now in a situation where you've gone through all those steps as a district leader. The next steps are to think about the educator resources. We gave you a quick tour of that so that you can go through and take a look. And we will be providing a 2-minute tour, we think, possibly 3 minutes, and that'll be posted on the front page and in our YouTube channel as well, so that you can say to educators, here's a quick place for you to get started. But this site is available for you now to get educators onto. And so as you review those, start thinking about how you're going to differentiate them for your staff. And you're going to have some staff where you can just say, look, here are some online tools, here are content resources you can go. And then others, you're going to need to back them up to best practices. And then finally, you can find the schedule of our webinars. They're there in the LearnOn site. And again, we will be distinguishing, as we've added webinar content on there, we'll be distinguishing. You'll see LIU12 LearnOn webinar and the title. Descriptions are almost done. We expect to have them by Wednesday at the latest, to have descriptions into the calendar as well, because I know a number of you were looking for those types of things. And so you can find that type of information there. The the other piece that we'll have there for you um, is going to be down this side where you register. Um, I did get a question about a suggestion for preschool instruction. Actually, we do have a preschool page that is being made, and we're working with our preschool folks um, to pull those resources together. The preschool instruction is going to follow a similar model, really, for our K-4 learners. K-4 learners are going to be they're going to have to be facilitated by some type of caregiver, whether it's a sibling, whether it's a parent, or whether it's somebody else that's within the um, household where they're being sequestered. And we're also going to point towards the need for those types of instructions to be given towards that caregiver. Like that'll be really critical. But we will have some resources. And if you go back and take a look at the parent page and you look for that daily schedule, that's another way that we might suggest that you work with preschoolers, is that you think about what the day might be structured like. So with that, you can see that the evaluation for this webinar is on there, and we want to make sure that you guys have an opportunity to please give us feedback, but also it'll help us to make sure that things are sort of working. I know some people found documents that weren't necessarily open. We're working really as fast as we can. We appreciate your patience as we develop this out for folks. So you could fill out the LearnOn web eval. You can see it's a bit.ly there. It is case sensitive. So you can do that. And then when this ends, you'll be redirected to um, to our Act 48 form, so that you can fill out that information with your PPID to receive Act 48 credit. So I see it looks like, Maureen, you raised your hand. So we're at that question and answer place. So I'm going to allow you to, you can unmute yourself and you can ask your question if you want.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
So my question is how many hours of instruction should our teachers be planning for, either a day or a week or whatever?
That's a great question. And that question was asked to PDE in my morning webinar. And the answer that they talked about was not necessarily worrying about the number of hours, but instead worrying about the types of activities that you can do. One of the things we talked about is that less is a little bit more, and that it's going to take you longer to do instruction online. So let's suppose that you had a lesson that was going to take an hour. That lesson probably will take 2 hours online to get started. And so rather than focusing on trying to meet the number of days, 180 days or 990 hours or whatever it might be, that you should be thinking more along the lines of trying to provide the resource to students to continue the education. It's a difficult situation, and I know that sounds a little bit like a non-answer, but that's the type of answer that we did get in terms of worrying about the hours. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. For anybody else, if you guys have questions, you can put them into the chat or into the or you can raise your hand, and I will give you guys the chance to also ask any questions. I seen that Nicole posted out some of the preschool resources that we have. You'll notice it says some links in there are preschool until we get more information. So we are actively working on that, and we hope to have that up again. Um, and then highlighted, remember at the beginning, we talked about on the web page, when we have new content, we'll be highlighting that on the front page. All right, well, the one thing that I would say is we know we're in unprecedented times in education. I heard Deputy Secretary Matt Snem say that to begin in the webinar I was attending this morning, and I agree. I mean, we haven't faced anything like this over the course of my 30 years plus in education. And so we just encourage you guys to work and ask questions as you need. Reach out to us, schedule leadership hours if you'd like, and then just hopefully everybody be well and take care of yourselves, and work through all of these issues as we do the best that we can to educate all of our students throughout this footprint. Thank you guys very much.